Praise Jesus, Victoria for Kingdom Therapy. Today, we are going to talk about altars. Altars, the battle of altars, or altars versus altars. An altar versus another altar, or the battle of two different altars. And our topic is battle of altars. So today we are literally going to talk about altars, the altars that govern our lives, the altars that determine how things turn out in our lives, the altars that are either pulling us down or taking us in front. So what we're talking about today is how to raise those altars, how to destroy those evil altars, how to sanctify those altars. So generally, our topic today is about altars. One altar versus another altar. So it's the battle of altars. Let us begin with defining what an altar is. An altar is a system of authorization. It's a system of authorization. Why do we say an altar is a system of authorization? It's a system because an altar is what authorizes something. An altar is what gives permission. An altar is what approves a different spirit, or an altar is what gives authority for something to move from one realm to another. In this case, a spirit to move from one realm to another. So an altar is a system of authorization. It's a system that gives authority. It's a system that gives permission. It's a system that approves spirits to move from one realm to another. So, for spirits to move from the spiritual realm to the physical realm, to the natural, to earth, there is need of an altar. Remember, I keep saying God is a God of protocol. When God created the heavens and the earth, He gave man authority over earth. And because man has authority over earth, only things that appear in the physical, in the body, have authority on earth. So everything that is spiritual needs to access authority first before coming on earth. That's why as human beings, we are spirits. But for us to show up on earth, we needed to get this kind of body. We needed a body. So the body we attained in order to show up on earth became an altar. So this physical body is an altar. It is just one of the many examples of altars. For many people who read in the Old Testament or in the earlier times, altars used to be particular places where firewood had to be collected, stones had to be piled together, and a place sanctified for it to become an altar. As the coming of Christ, we realize so many things changing, and one of the things that changed are altars. So today we no longer set up altars like the olden way of probably putting stones together and putting firewood. Today altars have shifted to either houses, cars, human beings, anything that has been sanctified for that particular purpose. So an altar is a place of spiritual activities. An altar is a place of spiritual activity where the spiritual, or what we call divinity, meets our physical or meets the natural. So an altar is a place of spiritual activity where divinity or spirits meet the physical. So an altar can authorize either good or bad. An altar can authorize either good spirits or bad spirits, because on an altar, spirits land and spirits take off. So in short, we can say an altar is a spiritual airport, because on the altar, spirits land and spirits take off. But these spirits can either be good spirits or they can be evil spirits. So let us, like I've been explaining, we've been talking about the law of territory, how I explained to you how earth operates. The law of territory is nothing can enter a territory without accessing a body that befits in that particular territory. I'll give an example. Like the law of territory is nothing can enter that particular territory without accessing a body that suits and thrives in that particular territory. Let us give an example of earth as a territory. Earth as a territory, anything that must enter earth must have a physical body. For example, physical, like it must be a physical object or a physical being. So for anything to access earth, it must access the body that befits earth. For example, you are a spiritual being, but for you to exist on earth, you had to acquire a body. You had to go through birth for you to acquire a body. Dogs have bodies. These phones we see in front of us are objects. They have a body that befits in this realm that we are in. For us to go to heavens, we must shed this body. We must acquire a body. We must acquire a container that befits the heavenly territory. That's why we know that when we die, this body rots. From dust we come, and to dust we go back. When we say from dust we come and to dust we go back, it does not mean that you, the person, you, Victoria, the persona, you, the spirit, Victoria, has gone back to dust. No. It is this container that you want to be able to exist on earth that is going to remain on earth. It's going to rot. So you will wear a different body, or you'll wear a different identity that befits heaven, that befits the heavenly territory. So I hope you understand. So the altar, an altar authorizes spirits, authorizes spirits to move from one realm to another, from one territory to another. So sometimes, like, it's the norm that for a spirit to move from one territory to another, it must possess a body. That's why we know that spirits possess bodies. But spiritually, spirits found a way of accessing different realms without accessing bodies. Yes, they can access bodies. That's why you can see birds. A spirit can access a bird. A spirit can possess a bird. A spirit can possess a dog, can possess a cat, an owl, a person. You can notice a spirit can speak over a person. So a spirit to appear in a realm, in a dimension that is not of it, it will have to access a body. But then spirits are found a different way of accessing a particular territory without actually using bodies, and that is through altars. An altar gives authority to spirits to transverse from one realm to another. So without an altar, it is illegal for a spirit to move from one territory to another. So spirits are not allowed on earth unless there is an altar or a body. So in Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5, we notice that we are already spirits. human beings are already spirits that were in existence, but we simply needed a body to come on earth. The body became the altar which we used to come on earth. So the Victoria in me, the spirit called Victoria in me, had to access this body in order to be able to exist on earth. There are so many bodies already, there are so many spirits already in existence, and all they need is either an altar or a body to be able to access earth. So when you see a child born, it does not mean that that child was non-existent. It means in the spiritual realm, that child was already in existence. His spirit was already in existence. But what he needed, what that child needed, was a body in order to manifest on earth. So the process of childbirth or childbearing is a process that gives the spirit a body in order to appear on earth. That's why human beings are portals. A woman's womb is a portal. A body itself is an altar. So let us read Jeremiah 1:5. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations." So this verse shows that before we were formed in our mother's wombs, God knew us. So how does God know us? God knows us because he had already created us. We were already in existence as spirits. He already knew us. So just because we didn't yet have a physical form does not mean that we were not in existence. He knew us. The verse 5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." So he knew us. We were already in existence. We simply needed a womb for us to show up physically on earth. So Jeremiah gives us that example clearly, that being born through a woman simply gives you flesh, simply gives you a form that can exist on earth, that can exist in this territory, that can exist in this realm. So the woman's body or the woman's womb becomes the altar. In this case, it becomes the portal through which you transverse from the spirit as a spiritual being into the natural as flesh, as a body, as a person. Let us look at another example that shows that we exist in spirit, or things exist in spirit before they actually take on physical form. Let us read John, the book of John, chapter 1, verse 1. John 1:1 says, "In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." So, what does John 1:1 says? John says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But who do we know is the Word? The Word is Jesus Christ. So it means in the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was Jesus. Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. So in the previous video, I spoke about the Holy Spirit and the three Trinity. So whoever is confused about how Jesus becomes God, you can go back and listen and learn more about the Trinity in the previous video about the Holy Spirit. So the Word was Jesus, but why is it that in the spiritual realm Jesus is not called Jesus? Jesus is just the earthly name of the Word. In the spirit, he is referred to as the Word. So in creation originally, Jesus was with God. The Word was with God. But for the Word to appear on earth, it had to take on a physical body because the Word was a spirit. So it had to take on a physical body. And the physical, when the Word took on a physical body, it was then called Jesus. So Jesus becomes the Word, but in physical form. So through birth by Mary, the Word gained access to the physical territory, to earth. So it took a womb, it took Mary as an altar for the Word to show up on earth, and that Word is named Jesus. So in other words, in all realms or in the physical realm, spirits are illegal. Spirits cannot show up in the physical realm. They are illegal. But people found a way. People found a way, mediums. When we say people, we are meaning a spiritual people who are spiritualists. When we say spiritualists, we could mean prophets, we could mean men of God or reverends, we could mean satanists, we could mean astrologists, we could mean diviners, we could mean witches. So it's general. People found a way of bringing spirits on earth. Remember, we are spiritual beings, but not only us as humans are spirits. There are so many spirits in the spiritual realm. Like we already said, we have what we call evil spirits and then good spirits. So people found a way of bringing spirits on earth, in the physical, in this territory that we exist in, depending on what they want to use those spirits for, depending on why they are summoning those spirits. So what did they create that became a portal for spirits to exist on earth? That which they created is what an altar is. So altars summon spirits. When you set up an altar, you're summoning spirits. Whether you're summoning good spirits or you're summoning evil spirits, you need an altar. That's why if we are summoning the Spirit of God or the Holy Spirit, we need an altar. And also the other people who summon evil spirits, they in turn need an altar. So now we've come to the beginning. We've understood what altars are. So now we are going to see how altars battle altars, or how we set up altars, how we raise altars, how we destroy altars. So altars summon spirits. Altars have not begun today. Altars have not begun today, and they were not begun they've not begun in this generation or in this generation we are in now. Altars, like we've said, are summon spirits. So even our forefathers, even in the past generations, even in the Bible days, people knew how to summon different spirits. And remember, I said that the spirits can either be good or bad. So people knew how to summon those spirits. That's why even in the Oldest Testament or the New Testament, in the Bible days, the spirits were being summoned. When we go into the book of Genesis, in the very beginning in Genesis, we notice that our forefather Noah used to set up altars in order to summon the Spirit of God. Let us read Genesis chapter 8 verse 1. It says, "Then God remembered Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth at the end of the 150 days of 50 days. 50 days the waters decreased. Then the ark rested on the seventh month, the seventh day of the month, on the mountain of Ararat. Fast forward, when Noah gets out of the ark, the first thing he does is to set up an altar. So Noah constructed an altar, the first thing he did when he got out of the ark. Let us go fast forward, Genesis 8. Let us read verse 20. Verse 20 says, Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done today. So we notice that even our forefather Noah, the moment he got out of the ark, after the floods, after God destroying the world, Noah sets up an altar. Why was he setting up an altar? We said that an altar summons spirit. Noah needed to summon the spirit of God. Noah needed to summon the spirit of God. So when Noah set up an altar, like we said, in the olden days, altars would be set up, people would set up stones, and then they would what we call a choto in Luganda, people call it. That's the reason why in Luganda altars are called a choto. So a choto is setting up stones, and then you put firewood underneath it for something to boil or something to cook on the top. So why do that? That exactly is a metaphor, that the stones represent a setup of where the spirit will land. The firewood which burns the fire represents the prayers or the sanctification or the incantations or the enchantments or the praises that go into the different stones. And then the food on top represents what you want come down, what you want to cook, what you want to receive. So it is simply the whole process of cooking on the stones that people used to do in the Old Testament represents, or that people used to do in the older generations represents an altar. That's why in Uganda or in Buganda particularly, that kind of cooking is called setting up a choto or okukume choto. And we know that when we are praying in Luganda, when you are setting up different sessions of prayer, we still call it okukuma echoto. So we notice that Noah set up an altar for God because he wanted an interaction with God. And then he set up the altar, and then he had to make a sacrifice on the altar. The sacrifice included him burning birds, burning clean birds, clean animals, and offering them as offerings to God on that altar. So when they burnt up, there was an aroma that was soothing that went up, and when it went up, the spirit of the Lord came down. So an altar summons spirit. In this case, Noah was summoning the spirit of God. So when Noah appeased God through the altar, through sacrificing on the altar, the spirit of God came down. And when the spirit of God came down, God made promises. He said he will never again curse the ground, and he will never again destroy man, or destroy all man again. So it took an altar for that covenant to happen. So you can't fight an enemy you don't understand. You can't fight an enemy you don't understand. Remember, I said there are evil altars and then we have good altars. Noah had to set up an altar for a good spirit to come down. So, most of us have enemies, but these enemies raised altars. They invited spirits in, and they created a place for these spirits to be summoned. They created altars for these spirits to come down, and these spirits have tormented us, have tormented our parents, have tormented our grandparents, have tormented our children. But remember, even if we are saying this topic is altar battling altar, or altar versus altar, you cannot fight an altar that you don't know, because behind every altar you see, there is a spirit that governs that altar. Even the church you go to, there is a spirit behind that altar, because a church itself is an altar. Whatever you see in the physical, whether good or bad, has a spiritual backing. Even money has spiritual backing. So everything that has spiritual backing has an altar that speaks for it, because that spirit must come and sit on that altar. So you can't fight an enemy you don't know. You can't fight an altar you don't know. And you can't fight an altar you don't understand. If you fight an altar you don't understand, you will shoot in blanks. You will pray, you will fast, you will sacrifice, you will, some of you use witch doctors, you will travel to Bujumbura, you will travel to villages, you'll travel to where, looking for witches, looking for diviners, looking for so many things to destroy things or to recreate things. But as long as you do not know what you are fighting, or as long as you do not know what is stopping you, you are going to shoot in blanks. So altars can make you assume that you're a failure. Altars can make you assume that you're finished. Altars can make you assume wrong assumptions. Why? Because you may be shooting in blanks. You may not know what you're fighting. You may not know what exactly that is troubling you. So, the root cause of any trouble, any delay, any failure, anything going on in your life, even happiness itself, even blessings, even money, even wealth, there is an altar. So if the altar behind is evil, you're going to experience evil reactions. So that means that's an altar to break. So if the altar is godly and it's a good altar, you're going to experience blessings, and that's an altar to keep. Now that we've understood, for a blessing to happen, there must be a good altar behind the blessing. And for any curse or any trouble or any failure or delay to happen, there must still be an altar behind it. So, what do we do now? We said if the altar is demonic or evil, we need to break that altar. So if the altar is good and is giving you blessing, then we need to keep that altar. So we are going to look at how to raise altars, how to break demonic altars, and then how to maintain or keep right altars. Because like we said, it's altar versus altar. Altar battling altar. If you want blessings, if you want a good life, if you want a good sustainability, you must raise a good altar. Or you must break down a bad altar that is bringing you bad luck and bad omen. So that means the altar, the good altar you're raising must break down the evil altar that is bringing you calamity. So I think now you notice an altar must verse an altar. So after winning or accessing a miracle in life, before you celebrate, first build an altar. For you to sustain any blessing in life, to sustain any miracle, to sustain anything good, any prosperity, like we said, there must be an altar backing you up. So to get something beautiful, there must be an altar. But to also maintain and sustain that particular thing, you need to get an altar. That's why you've seen people get money, become rich, and then they lose the money. Why? It's because they won, they accessed a miracle, they accessed something beautiful. And when they finished accessing their miracles or their prosperity or their win in life, they stopped what they did. They stopped what they did to get that win. Whatever altar you use to get something, that altar must be maintained to keep that thing. So if you used prayer as an altar to get something, you will use prayer to maintain that blessing. I am not here to speak about diabolical spirits. I am not here to speak about, to encourage witchcraft and all those things. But I will tell you one thing the witches know. The witches know this. If a person got a child through the shrine, they keep that child in the shrine. As in, they will keep sacrificing and appeasing the gods that gave them that child. If they got their wealth from enchantments, or they got their wealth from a particular spirit, or from a shrine, or from witchcraft, they will continue sacrificing to that evil altar or to that evil spirit that gave them that particular thing or that wealth. It's only us Christians who are very ignorant and adamant. You get something through prayer, but after accessing that miracle, you stop praying, and then you come back to God asking yourself, why I had a child, but then the child has turned out bad. The child is a drunkard. Probably my child died prematurely. Every day I'm in hospital. You prayed to you prayed to God to get that child. Is that child dedicated back to God? Are you continuously sacrificing to God? Sacrifice is not cutting cows and all those things. Come on, Christians. Sacrifice could even be, are you continually offering prayers and thanksgiving for that child that God gave you, or for the wealth that God gave you, or for the job that God gave you? Are you giving in a tithe? Are you giving in first seed offering? Are you giving offering for that particular thing that God gave you? Or because you accessed a miracle, then you stopped doing what gave you the miracle? So whichever altar gives you the miracle, you must maintain that altar. You must continually, if you want to maintain, if you want to keep the blessing that you've gotten out of an altar, you must continue offering on that same altar. So anything can access, or anything that can be given access or control, is going to be backed up by altar. If the access is for wealth, if the control is for, let's say, childbirth, whatever you use the altar for, you must go back to that altar, because that altar is what is backing up your blessing. So in short, I am advising Christians, if you got anything through prayer or sacrifice or giving or whatever you give, you should continually do it to maintain that. I'm not going to speak for the diabolical people, but the unfortunate bit is that diabolical people know what to do. It's only us, the saints of God, who keep being adamant. So let us, like we already saw in Genesis 8, verse 20, we saw Noah build an altar for the Lord because Noah wanted to keep the blessing, to keep the blessing God had given to him, to keep the life God had given to him, for him to stay alive with his family. He had to set up an altar, and that altar kept the curse away. So God said, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. It took that altar for that blessing of life to be sustainable. So after Noah built and sacrificed on that altar, the Lord spoke after enjoying the sweet aroma, and the Lord said he will never again curse the ground. So Noah, well, you notice one thing, that Noah did not pray for forgiveness of sins. No, Noah did not pray, because remember, God was destroying the city, because the God destroyed earth because of sin. But Noah did not even pray for forgiveness. Noah did not even intercede for his family. No, what Noah did was simply to raise and sanctify an altar. What he did was simply to build and sanctify an altar. So what happens on the altar? The altar will summon a spirit. The altar will speak for you. So every time you raise an altar, that altar speaks for you. There are so many things you may not know. There's so many things you may not know or do, but just because you raised an altar, that altar continually speaks for you. Let us go to Exodus 20. Exodus 20. Exodus 20, God said that you should build an altar on earth, and I shall come down. Let's see. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself carved images. Fast forward, you shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. When you raise an altar for me, I shall come down. When we go to Exodus 20 verse 24, it says, and an altar of earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you and I will bless you. So when you raise an altar of God, we've noticed when you raise an altar of God, God comes down and then blesses you. So child of God, what is stopping you from raising an altar of God? You do not get blessings because you pray too much. No. You get blessings because you've raised an altar to God. So from Exodus 20, verse 24, we notice that for God to come down, like he said, I will come to you and I will bless you. For God to come down, an altar had to be raised. Remember, we said an altar is a spiritual airport, and an altar summons spirit. When you set up an altar, you can summon the Spirit of God. Why does it need an altar? Why does God need an altar to come to earth? God is actually illegal on earth. You people, God created earth. But when God created earth, he gave earth and its domain unto man. So man rules the earth. And God is not someone who breaks his principles for anything, not even for himself. So for God to come down, for his presence to come down, you need to raise an altar. Because God himself is spirit. So because his spirit, the Spirit of God to come down on earth, because God being a spirit is illegal on earth. He is a spirit. So for him to come down on earth, he must come through an altar. So if you want God to show up in your life, If you want the presence of God to show up in your life, you must raise an altar that summons the Spirit of God. God is so faithful that when He gives, He won't take back what He has given you. God's gifts are irrevocable. So God gave a domain of earth to man. Soil belongs to Adam. Adam was given authority over soil. So that means earth belongs to Adam, or earth belongs to man. But then remember one thing, don't confuse this. Adam belongs to God. Adam does not belong to the soil. It's the soil that belongs to Adam. That means earth belongs to Adam, but Adam belongs to God. So that means man belongs to God. Earth belongs to man, and then man belongs to God. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that when the Bible says, you are the living sacrifice, you are my sanctuary, we are altars. That's how a human being becomes an altar. I, the human being, am an altar for God. God can come and sit within me. I am a sanctuary for God. I am a house for God. So God can sit in me. Why can God sit in me? God sits in me because I belong to Him. So God can come and sit in me. But for God to come and sit on earth, I must raise an altar. So remember, we said that there are so many different ways that spirits can come on earth. They can come through altars, but then they can also come through objects, or they can come through bodies. So my body, your body, our bodies are also altars. That's why God can sit within us. That's why the Spirit of God can possess us, and we actually even prophesy and say different things. So you are also an altar for God. But if your body, for God to use your body as an altar for Him, you must have offered yourself as a living sacrifice to Him, and you must be sanctified. If you're not sanctified, then you will have to set up an altar, child of God, so that God's presence or God's Spirit can be summoned on that altar. Yes, we've seen how the Spirit of God, or the good spirit, can be in possession through an altar or through the body. But we said there are also evil spirits. Evil spirits can also possess bodies. Evil spirits can also be summoned on altars. So witchcraft can't hold except there is an altar. Witchcraft too can't hold except there is an altar. You cannot be bewitched except there is an altar. So for you to be bewitched, an altar has to be set up. And on that altar, there must be enchantment. There must be sacrifice on that altar. And then there must be a spirit authorizing that altar to operate. And when your name is called on that altar, you shall be bewitched. So my dear child of God, a witch does not need your presence in order to bewitch you. Someone does not need your presence. They don't need you to be physically there for them to bewitch you. All they need is an altar. As long as they're sacrificing on that altar, as long as there is a spirit, an evil spirit authorizing that altar, as long as they're enchanting. Enchantment is both good and bad. Enchantment is literally words of worship to a spirit. So words of worship, even if they're worshiping an evil spirit, those are enchantments. So as long as they are worshiping the spirit, the evil spirit on that altar, they will bewitch you, child of God. A person bewitching you doesn't need to see you, because they will summon your spirit on that altar, because there is authorization. So you should know that there are good and bad altars. And all around us, there's so many demons, there's so many demonic altars, there's so many people who want to do us evil. So if people are raising evil altars against us, we must raise an altar of God against those evil altars. We must raise a good altar against those altars. You must set up an altar that is going to battle altars that are oppressing you. When we read Revelations 8, let us go to Revelations 8, verse 3. It says, "Then another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne of God. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with the fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake." So, altars are actually not only happening on earth. People, we need to learn our Bibles. Altars are even in heaven, before the throne of God. Revelations 8 verse 3 has said, before the throne of God, there is an altar before the throne of God. So when we pray, our prayers don't directly go, these things we say, from my mouth to God's ears. Hapana, you do not know your Bible. It is from your mouth to the altar. Are you hearing me? Not to the ear of God, to the altar. So the angels carry your prayers to the altar before the throne of God. And on that altar, that is where your prayers, that is where the prayers you offered are. The verse says, he was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints. You are the saints, upon the golden altar which was before the throne. God sits on the throne, but right before him there is an altar where our prayers are. So the angels, the ministering spirits, angels are ministering spirits. When you pray, the angels carry your prayer to the altar that is before the throne of God, and then God gets to hear your prayer. I already spoke about angels being ministering spirits in the previous videos. So all of you who are like, okay, what did she just say? I thought when I pray, Christians, we have sayings. We say, from your mouth direct to God's ears. My dear, there's an altar. There's an altar, and there's an angel that is carrying your prayer to that altar. So because this is Bible backing, it's the Bible that has said, and not me. So our prayers go through an altar. Because ask yourself, we are people who speak in so many different languages. But then these languages are not, someone is speaking in Acholi, another is speaking in French, another in English, another in Italy, another in Finnish from Finland, another is Swedish. So how does God get to hear? It is because when all our prayers converge before an altar, when they converge on an altar before the throne of God, they are transversed. Because we said that the altar is a spiritual airport, they are transferred into the language of God, the language of the Spirit. And God understands the language of the Spirit. God is not going to understand Chiganda, Swahili. No, whatever you say is transversed into the language of the Spirit that he understands. And that's why your prayers have to go through an altar, so that God will be able to understand your prayers. God's language is a language of the Spirit. So the altar acts as a middleman. It acts as the mediation ground that authorizes things to happen. So there is prayer, there is you praying at one point, then there is an angel taking your prayer to the altar. So that means there is an altar in the middle, and then there is God on the other side who is authorizing or who is answering your prayer. So when God answers your prayer as well, there's an angel that is bringing your answered prayer back to the altar, and then from the altar to you. So you need an altar, whether you want it or not. You need to raise an altar, because when you raise an altar, when you pray, your prayers go to the altar, and then from the altar the angel carries them to God. So when God answers, his answer comes to the altar. From the altar, you get your manifestation. So you need an altar. The altar is the middleman here. You're not going to get anything when you don't have an altar. Child of God, you need to have an altar. So let us deal with things that affect us. Naturally in our lives, in our families, there are spirits that have been authorized. And sometimes we know nothing about these spirits. You people, there are things our grandparents did when they did not know Christ yet. Or some of them don't even know Christ to date, and they're still doing those things. And whatever spirits they summon have authority over us. Why? It's because they raised an altar for those spirits. The moment there is an altar that is speaking, that altar can never stop speaking until it has been broken. Dear saint, that altar will never stop speaking until it has been broken. So that's why it's very important to raise an altar of God by yourself, because you need something. Some of you don't even know the altars that were raised in your family by either your parents. Sometimes our parents think they're helping us by raising these altars, by summoning these spirits. They enchant things to protect us, to give us wealth, to give us life, to do all these things, not knowing these things they're doing have consequences. So those altars they raised will speak and speak and speak until someone raises up to break that altar. I'll give you an example. You will notice that there's an altar that is speaking in your life if all you as siblings or family members experience the same things. I'll give an example. There are families where there's premature death.